Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. On the morning of the 13th of July, 2026, the quiet coastal city of Biddeford, Maine, woke up expecting an ordinary Monday. The streets were calm, neighbors were beginning their daily routines, and nothing suggested that this peaceful community was about to become the center of a national controversy. Just after 7 a.m., at the intersection of Pool and Hill Streets, a federal surveillance operation suddenly turned deadly. What started as an attempt by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, to stop a vehicle, ended with an officer firing multiple shots. Behind the wheel was 26-year-old Joan Sebastian Guerrero, a Colombian national who was living and working in Maine. Within moments, Guerrero had been critically wounded. Despite emergency efforts, he later died from his injuries. For the people who witnessed the incident, the violence came without warning. This wasn't a high-speed chase through city streets or a dramatic confrontation that unfolded over several minutes. According to witness accounts, everything happened incredibly fast. One nearby resident later recalled hearing several loud gunshots, initially believing the sounds were fireworks or some other disturbance. It wasn't until they looked outside that they realized something far more serious had just happened. Surveillance cameras from a nearby business captured part of the aftermath. The footage showed Guerrero's vehicle slowly rolling through the intersection after the shooting as federal agents rushed toward it. Within seconds, the scene transformed from what appeared to be a routine law enforcement operation into an active emergency. Roads were secured. First responders arrived, and investigators immediately began preserving evidence. But as the first reports reached the public, the questions started almost as quickly as the investigation itself. Who was Joan Sebastian Guerrero? Why had federal agents attempted to stop his vehicle? And, perhaps most importantly, why had an encounter that began as a surveillance operation ended with a young father losing his life? As more verified information emerged from federal officials, state investigators, and eyewitnesses, the case became increasingly complex. What initially appeared to be a straightforward law enforcement incident quickly evolved into a story that raised difficult questions about immigration enforcement, the use of deadly force, and accountability during federal operations. In this documentary, we'll carefully examine the verified timeline using official statements, publicly available investigative information, and reporting from reputable news organizations. We'll separate confirmed facts from unanswered questions, avoid speculation, and follow the evidence step by step to understand exactly what happened on that July morning in Biddeford, Maine. Because in cases like this, where emotions run high and conflicting accounts emerge almost immediately, the facts matter more than ever. Before we continue, if you appreciate carefully researched true crime documentaries built on verified facts, not rumors or speculation, please take a moment to like this video. It helps our work reach more viewers who value responsible investigative storytelling. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss future true crime investigations. As investigators work to piece together exactly what had happened, officials also confirmed the identity of the man who had lost his life. The victim was 26-year-old Joan Sebastian Guerrero, a Colombian national who had built a new life in the United States. According to his family and public officials, Guerrero was a devoted husband and the father of a young daughter. Friends and community members described him as a hard-working man focused on supporting his family through honest work. At the time of the incident, he was employed as a food delivery driver in Maine, and, importantly, authorities confirmed that he was legally authorized to work in the United States. One of the most significant revelations to emerge in the hours following the shooting was that Guerrero was not the individual federal agents had originally been investigating. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, ICE officers were conducting targeted surveillance at the last known address of another person, someone who reportedly had a final order of removal from the United States. The surveillance operation had been planned around that individual, not Joan Sebastian Guerrero, but shortly after 7 Monday morning, as a vehicle driven by Guerrero left the area, federal agents decided to initiate a stop. What happened over the next few moments remains the central question of this investigation. In its public statement, the Department of Homeland Security said Guerrero's vehicle allegedly attempted to flee after agents tried to stop it. The department stated that an ICE officer discharged his firearm because he feared the vehicle posed a danger to public safety. That explanation forms the official federal account of why deadly force was used. However, because the investigation is still ongoing, investigators are continuing to examine the evidence to determine exactly how those critical seconds unfolded. Surveillance footage, witness statements, physical evidence from the scene, and other investigative materials are all being reviewed by state and federal authorities. The shooting occurred at the intersection of Pool and Hill Streets in Biddeford, a quiet coastal community located roughly 15 miles southwest of Portland, Maine. Residents say it's typically a peaceful neighborhood, making the sudden eruption of gunfire even more shocking for those living nearby. News of the incident spread rapidly across Maine before quickly becoming a national story. The timing drew even greater attention because it marked the second fatal shooting involving an ICE agent in less than a week, following another deadly incident in Houston. As a result, the Biddeford shooting immediately became part of a broader national conversation surrounding immigration enforcement, officer use of force, and federal accountability. Within hours, community members gathered near the scene to hold vigils honoring Guerrero's life. Others organized demonstrations demanding transparency and a full public accounting of what had occurred that morning. The emotional response reflected not only grief over the loss of a young father, but also growing concern over how the operation had unfolded. Maine's highest elected officials also responded quickly. Governor Janet Mills called for a thorough review of the incident, while U.S. Senators Susan Collins and Angus King requested detailed information about the shooting and emphasized the need for a complete and transparent investigation. As pressure mounted from both the public and elected leaders, multiple investigations were launched, each focused on answering one fundamental question. How did a surveillance operation targeting one individual end with the death of someone who wasn't even the intended subject of the investigation? As investigators continued gathering evidence, attention increasingly shifted from the operation itself to the life of the man who had been killed. Joan Sebastian Guerrero had come to Maine from Colombia in search of better opportunities for his family. According to relatives, neighbors, and community advocates, he wasn't someone who sought attention. Instead, they described him as a hard-working husband and father whose daily focus was providing for his wife and young daughter. Like countless others trying to build a stable future, Guerrero earned a living as a food delivery driver, spending long hours on the road to support the people who depended on him. As more verified information became public, one fact stood out above all others. Federal officials confirmed that Guerrero was not the individual ICE agents had been looking for that morning. If you're finding this investigation informative so far, consider sharing this documentary with others who value factual reporting. Every share helps support independent, evidence-based true crime content and encourages responsible discussions based on verified facts rather than speculation. The surveillance operation had been organized around someone else, a person who, according to the Department of Homeland Security, had a final order of removal. Guerrero's presence at the location placed him in the middle of an operation that, by every official account released so far, was never originally intended to involve him. That revelation dramatically changed the public conversation. For many residents of Biddeford, the tragedy became about far more than a single law enforcement encounter. It raised difficult questions about how surveillance operations are conducted, how suspects are identified, and how quickly situations can escalate when decisions must be made in only a matter of seconds. The emotional impact across the community was immediate. Within hours of the shooting, flowers, candles, and handwritten messages began appearing near the intersection of Pool and Hill Streets. Residents gathered for candlelight vigils to honor Guerrero's memory, while family members, friends, and supporters struggled to understand how an ordinary Monday morning had ended in such devastating loss. Protests soon followed. Demonstrators assembled throughout Biddeford, calling for greater transparency and questioning the tactics used during the federal operation. While opinions differed on immigration enforcement itself, many people shared a common demand that every detail surrounding the shooting be thoroughly investigated and made public. Longtime residents also pointed to another unsettling fact. According to local reporting, this was Biddeford's first fatal shooting in nearly 2 years, making the incident especially shocking for a community more accustomed to quiet neighborhoods than national headlines. As public attention intensified, officials gradually released additional verified information about what had happened that morning, although many important questions remained unanswered. Guerrero's family publicly identified him and spoke about the devastating loss they were experiencing. They described him not as a headline or statistic, but as a loving husband, a caring father, and the primary provider for his family. Federal authorities also confirmed that Guerrero was legally authorized to work in the United States, an important detail that clarified his immigration and employment status amid widespread public discussion. Investigators then reconstructed the basic timeline of the operation. According to the Department of Homeland Security, ICE agents had positioned themselves early on the morning of July 13 outside a residence connected to an individual who was the subject of a final order of removal. Their assignment was to conduct surveillance and monitor activity at that location. At approximately 7 a.m., a vehicle driven by Joan Sebastian Guerrero left the area. Federal agents moved to stop the vehicle. According to DHS, Guerrero's vehicle allegedly attempted to flee after officers initiated the stop. The department stated that one ICE agent then fired his weapon because he believed the situation posed a threat to public safety. Those shots struck Guerrero while he remained inside his vehicle. Even after the gunfire, the vehicle continued moving for a short distance before finally coming to a stop. Federal agents quickly approached, removed Guerrero from the vehicle, and emergency medical personnel responded. Despite those efforts, Guerrero was later pronounced dead. Those events now form the foundation of multiple ongoing investigations. While officials have outlined the basic sequence, investigators are still working to determine exactly what occurred during those critical moments and whether every action taken that morning was justified under the circumstances. For the people living near Pool and Hill Streets, the sound of gunfire shattered what had begun as an ordinary Monday morning. Several witnesses later told investigators they heard multiple shots ring out in rapid succession. At first, one nearby resident said the noise was so unexpected that they assumed it might have been a drive-by shooting or another isolated disturbance. But as neighbors stepped outside, they quickly realized something much more serious had unfolded just down the street. Within minutes, the quiet residential neighborhood had transformed into an active crime scene. Surveillance cameras from a nearby business captured part of what happened immediately after the shooting. While the footage does not provide every answer investigators are seeking, it reportedly shows federal agents moving toward Guerrero's vehicle after the shots were fired. That video, along with other digital evidence, has become an important piece of the ongoing investigation as authorities work to reconstruct the exact sequence of events. As emergency personnel and law enforcement secured the area, the reality of what had happened became painfully clear. Blood could be seen near the vehicle, a stark reminder that a routine federal operation had ended in the death of a young father. Officers from the Biddeford Police Department established a security perimeter while investigators from multiple agencies began documenting the scene, preserving evidence, and interviewing witnesses. Despite intense public interest, officials released very little forensic information during the early stages of the investigation. Authorities did not publicly disclose details such as the number of rounds fired, ballistic findings, or the precise location of Guerrero's injuries beyond confirming that the shooting was fatal. Likewise, as of the latest verified reports, the complete findings of the medical examiner's autopsy had not yet been released to the public. That limited information has left many important questions unanswered, making the physical evidence collected at the scene especially significant. Investigators are reviewing 911 calls placed immediately after the shooting, along with statements from witnesses who either heard or observed portions of the incident. Digital evidence, including surveillance footage from nearby businesses and any additional available recordings, is also being carefully analyzed to establish an accurate timeline of those critical moments. At this stage of the investigation, officials have not publicly confirmed that Guerrero was armed. Likewise, authorities have not released detailed information about damage to his vehicle beyond what is already known that it was struck during the shooting. Those are important distinctions, as investigators continue to rely on verified evidence rather than speculation. Because the shooting involved a federal law enforcement officer, multiple agencies quickly opened independent investigations. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, began reviewing the circumstances surrounding the use of deadly force. At the same time, the Maine Attorney General's office launched its own investigation, consistent with state procedures involving fatal police shootings. The Maine State Police also assisted with processing the scene and supporting the broader investigative effort. Meanwhile, the ICE agent involved in the shooting, an officer assigned to the agency's Enforcement and Removal Operations Division, was placed on administrative leave. According to law enforcement policy, this is a standard administrative step following an officer-involved fatal shooting and should not be interpreted by itself as evidence of wrongdoing. As investigators collected physical evidence, analyzed surveillance footage, and compared witness accounts with official statements, one thing became increasingly clear. The answers to what happened that morning would not come from public opinion or early assumptions. They would have to come from a careful examination of the evidence, one fact at a time. As investigators continued examining the evidence, one issue quickly became a central focus of public discussion. Unlike many local police departments across the United States, the ICE agents involved in this operation were not wearing body cameras at the time of the shooting. That absence immediately became one of the biggest challenges facing investigators. After speaking with officials from the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Senator Angus King publicly noted that there was no body camera footage available to document the encounter. Without that first-hand video, investigators have been forced to rely on other forms of evidence to reconstruct what happened during the critical seconds before the shots were fired. That means every available piece of information carries added importance. Investigators continue to review surveillance footage from nearby businesses, examine phone records where relevant, analyze vehicle data, interview witnesses, and compare those findings with the official statements provided by federal authorities. Each source of evidence helps build a clearer timeline, but none alone can fully answer every question surrounding the encounter. At this stage, authorities have emphasized that the investigation remains active. No federal agents have been arrested or charged in connection with the shooting. Instead, investigators say their immediate objective is to determine exactly how the incident unfolded and whether the use of deadly force was legally justified under the circumstances. Those conclusions will ultimately depend on the totality of the evidence rather than any single statement or recording. Then, as additional facts became public, the case took an even more significant turn. Officials confirmed that Joan Sebastian Guerrero was not the individual ICE agents had originally been surveilling that morning. According to the Department of Homeland Security, the operation was centered on another person who reportedly had a final order of removal. Guerrero entered the situation during that surveillance operation, and it was his vehicle that agents ultimately attempted to stop. That confirmation dramatically changed the national conversation. For many people, the shooting was no longer viewed only as an officer-involved use-of-force case. It also raised broader questions about how federal surveillance operations are conducted, how individuals are identified during enforcement actions, and what safeguards exist to prevent tragic outcomes involving people who are not the intended subjects of an investigation. Calls for transparency grew louder. Community leaders, elected officials, and advocacy organizations all pressed for a complete accounting of the events that unfolded in Biddeford. Many argued that the public deserved a clear explanation of how a man who was not the original target of the operation came to be fatally shot during that encounter. At the same time, differing accounts of the incident began to emerge. According to the Department of Homeland Security, Guerrero's vehicle allegedly attempted to flee after agents initiated the stop. DHS has stated that the officer fired because he believed the situation posed a threat to public safety. However, some witnesses and Guerrero's family have questioned whether deadly force was necessary under the circumstances. Those concerns have become a significant part of the public debate, although investigators have not yet reached final conclusions regarding the officer's actions. The absence of body camera footage has made resolving those competing accounts even more difficult. Without a direct recording from the officers involved, investigators must carefully compare witness testimony, surveillance video, forensic evidence, and other available information before determining exactly what occurred during those final moments. The timing of the shooting also added to the national attention surrounding the case. Coming only days after another fatal incident involving an ICE agent in Houston, the Biddeford shooting intensified an already active discussion about federal immigration enforcement, use-of-force policies, and the role of accountability in high-risk operations. For Guerrero's family, however, the broader debate could not change one painful reality. A husband and father who left home that morning never returned, and the search for answers was only beginning. As of the most recent verified public updates, no criminal charges have been filed against the ICE agent involved in the shooting. The investigation remains active, with both the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Maine Attorney General's office continuing to examine the evidence. Because the case is still under review, only limited court records have been made public, and there are currently no bail hearings, criminal trials, or sentencing proceedings associated with the incident. Much of the investigative work is taking place outside the public eye. Detectives, prosecutors, and federal officials continue reviewing witness interviews, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and official reports before determining whether any further legal action is warranted. Until those investigations are completed, many of the questions surrounding the shooting remain unanswered. While investigators search for those answers, Guerrero's family continues to live with an irreversible loss. Relatives, friends, and community advocates have remembered Joan Sebastian Guerrero not simply as the victim in a nationally reported case, but as a hard-working husband and devoted father whose primary goal was providing for his family. Their tributes have focused on the life he lived rather than only the circumstances of his death. Across Biddeford, candlelight vigils and community gatherings became places where people could mourn together, leave flowers, and remember the young father whose life ended so suddenly. At the same time, demonstrations throughout Maine reflected broader concerns about federal immigration enforcement. Many participants called for greater transparency, more accountability, and a careful review of the policies and tactics used during enforcement operations. State leaders also continued pressing for answers. Governor Janet Mills, along with U.S. Senators Susan Collins and Angus King, publicly called for transparency and urged investigators to conduct a complete and impartial review of the shooting. Their message was consistent. The public deserves a clear understanding of exactly what happened and why. National media coverage ensured the story reached audiences far beyond Maine. Because the Biddeford shooting occurred only days after another fatal incident involving an ICE agent in Houston, many news organizations viewed the two events as part of a larger discussion about federal law enforcement practices and the use of deadly force. Even so, each incident remains subject to its own independent investigation, and officials have emphasized that conclusions must be based on the specific evidence in each case. Public opinion has remained divided. Some Americans continue to express strong support for immigration enforcement, while also questioning whether this particular encounter could have been handled differently. Others argue that the shooting demonstrates the need for significant changes to federal enforcement procedures. Regardless of those differing viewpoints, there is broad agreement that the investigation should be thorough, impartial, and guided by the facts. Following the incident, ICE announced several policy changes intended to address concerns raised by the case. Among those changes were plans to significantly reduce most routine traffic stops during enforcement operations and expand the use of body-worn cameras for officers in the field. Whether those measures will prevent similar tragedies in the future remains to be seen, but they represent one of the first institutional responses following the events in Biddeford. For now, the case remains under active review by both federal and state authorities. The final conclusions will depend on the evidence, not assumptions, political opinions, or speculation. As investigators continue their work, every finding will play a role in determining exactly what occurred during those critical moments on the morning of the 13th of July, 2026. The death of Joan Sebastian Guerrero serves as a reminder of how quickly a routine law enforcement operation can become a life-changing tragedy. It also highlights the importance of clear communication, careful identification, responsible decision-making, and transparency whenever deadly force is used. Behind every investigation are real people whose lives are forever changed. A young daughter lost her father. A wife lost her husband. A community that once expected another ordinary morning found itself asking difficult questions that still have not been fully answered. As this case moves forward, the search for truth will continue through evidence, official findings, and the legal process, not through rumors or assumptions. Only a complete and transparent investigation can provide the answers that Guerrero's family, the Biddeford community, and the American public are waiting for. What are your thoughts on this case based solely on the verified facts currently available? We encourage respectful discussion in the comments, recognizing that the investigation is still ongoing and that every conclusion should be grounded in evidence. If you enjoy professionally researched true crime documentaries like this one, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We publish in-depth investigations covering major criminal cases from across the United States, always based on verified evidence and official sources. If you appreciate carefully researched true crime documentaries that focus on facts rather than speculation, consider subscribing for more in-depth investigations into cases making headlines across the United States. Joan Sebastian Guerrero's story may end here, but the search for answers continues, and until the investigation reaches its conclusion, this case remains one that the nation will be watching closely.